In this painting guide, we'll be focusing on the Iron Hands. While tactical and veteran squads will be the main subjects, the lessons in this video will apply to all Iron Hands infantry. The techniques covered here make them one of the quickest and easiest legions to paint. Whether you're a seasoned painter or just starting out, this guide will help you get your 10th Legion painted and on the battlefield in no time. We'll be incorporating some Forge World parts into these squads, as well as some pieces I've accumulated over the years from my bits box. The tactical squad is fairly standard. There are minimal conversions here, just a few bear heads and a leg from the Forge World Previan model. I always recommend keeping bolters and special weapons separate for easier painting. The veteran squad has a bit more variety, featuring weapons from the Despoiler kit, a few Volkite Serpentas from the Skyhunter set, a Legacy Plastic Mark III Thunderhammer, and parts from the original Iron Hands Mark III squad. The Sergeant is equipped with a head from the Iron Hands Mark VI helmet set. We are also going to be painting the new Shadrach Medusan model, alongside our squads. I start by priming the models with Chaos Black Spray. Be sure to achieve full coverage on all angles to ensure a solid base for painting. Switching to the airbrush, I apply Vallejo Model Air Metallic Black to all the power armor. This will be washed down in a later step, deepening the black appearance and giving it a subtle metallic sheen. Starting with Ironbreaker, I paint all of the trim on our Mark III armor, and then paint all of the cables and vents on the power pack and backsides of the armor. I paint the power sword blades and silver parts on the Legion Vexilla and Nuncio Vox. At first glance, Heresy-era Iron Hands may seem to be simply black, but the color plates reveal a mix of metallic black and gunmetal with solid black accents. To achieve this look, I switch to Abaddon Black and paint all of the shoulder pauldrons. This is also a great opportunity to clean up any Ironbreaker trim. I apply Abaddon Black to some random knee pads across the squads, as well as the chainswords, heavy chainswords, sword hilts, Volkite weapons, bolt pistol and bolter casings, and the Nuncio Vox antennas. Returning to Ironbreaker, I paint all of the silver details on the chainswords, Volkite Serpentas, bolt pistols, Bionics, Thunderhammer, and Shadrach Medusan's bolter. Sticking with Shadrach Medusan, I use Corn Red and paint the base coat on his cingulum belt and cape. I also paint the lenses on Bionic Eyes and the Nuncio Vox operator's helmet antenna and Nuncio Vox. Using Runelord Brass, I paint the tips and coils of the Volkite Serpentas, part of our veteran sergeant's Thunderhammer, as well as the exposed casing on Shadrach Medusan's bolter. Using Eschen Gray, I do a loose highlight over our bolt pistols, weapon hilts, Nuncio Vox antennas, chain weapons, Volkite Serpentus, and Shadrach's bolter and belt pouches. I then paint an extremely loose highlight over our solid black shoulder pauldrons and black knee pads. I don't try and be clean when I do this. I just want to add a bit of gray to the solid armor. They will be washed down and live behind a transfer, so don't have to be super clean. Using Caliban Green, I paint Shadrach's frag grenades, Nuncio Vox details, and the Augury scanner screen. Using Cantor Blue, I paint the first layer on all of our helmet eyelenses. Then I use Warboss Green and highlight the green Nuncio Vox details, Augury scanner, and Shadrach's frag grenade. Next, using Mephiston Red, I highlight the red Nuncio Vox lenses and Bionic Eyes. I highlight Shadrach Medusan's cingulum belt and cape. The cape's highlight is more of a dry brush highlight. Then, using Macragge Blue, I paint the second layer on our eye lenses to brighten them up. Switching to Retributor armor, I highlight everything we previously painted Runelord Brass. Now, I wash the entire models with Nuln Oil. This step will tone everything down, accentuate the details, and add depth to the silver. I apply the wash liberally, but ensure it doesn't pool in the eye sockets, as I want those to remain lightly washed so the blue can really stand out. I also wash down Shadrach's cape. Next, using Retributor armor, I paint the Nuncio Vox, power sword guards and hilts, as well as the gold on the Legion Vexillas. Then, using Ironbreaker, I dry brush highlight all of the gold we painted in the previous step. Using Xandri dust, I base all of the parchment on the Legion Vexillas and the servo skulls on the Nuncio Voxes. Next, using Ushapti bone, I do a second layer over the servo skulls on the Nuncio Voxes and the parchment on the Legion Vexillas. When applying this layer, I build up the thickness on the raised areas to enhance their brightness, creating a highlight effect. Switching to Abaddon black, I paint the scripture on the Legion Vexilia. The key is to use a very small amount of paint on a fine tip brush. Using white scar, I highlight the skulls on the Nuncio Vox and parchment on the Legion Vexillas. Don't worry about highlighting over the scripture, as it will punch through the thin white scar paint and still be visible. Then, using Agrax Earthshade, I wash down all of the gold on the Nuncio Voxes, weapons, and Legion Vexillas. Next, I use Reichland Flesh Shade and wash the Legion Vexilla parchment and Nuncio Vox skulls. To do our faces, I start by applying a base layer of Kislev flesh to our helmetless Marines. I chose Kislev flesh over Cadian flesh tone to give the Iron Hands a paler, colder appearance, in line with the reference artwork. Next, I use Flayed One flesh and do a highlight on the raised areas, such as the bridges of the nose, cheekbones, chins, jawline, sides of forehead, and eyebrow line. Then, I use white scar and do a second thinner highlight over the same areas that we did in the previous step. Using Reichland Flesh Shade, I wash down over all of our skin tones. It will add a bit of skin color and blend our layers together. Returning to Ironbreaker, I paint the service studs and all the silver details on Shadrach's cingulum belt, belt equipment, and other small details. Using Corn Red, I paint the base layer on Shadrach's sword scabbard and touch up any brush slips on the cingulum studs that I painted in the previous step. Next, using Mephiston Red, I do a follow-up highlight over our Corn Red. Back with Eshin Gray, I highlight Shadrach Medusan's hair. Then with Nuln Oil, I wash down Shadrach's hair. The wash will soften the transition from hair to flesh. Using a smaller brush, I put a dab of Nuln Oil in the eye sockets for depth. I apply wash around the bionics to help them better transition into the flesh. I finish by washing down the sword scabbard and the newly added silver on the cingulum belt. Using Celestra Gray, I take my time and paint the base layer on all of the trim on both sides of Shadrach's cape, as well as his Legion and command icon on his shoulder pauldrons. I then switch to white scar and do a second layer. I go thicker on the raised areas to make them brighter to create a highlight. I finally glue on Shadrach's cape and then Nuln Oil wash all of our white to tone it down and blend everything into our previous layers. So now our Marines are looking pretty good. Like all black armored legions, they look very incomplete without basing or their transfers. We are going to mimic the transfer placements from the color plates out of the Horus Heresy Book 2, Massacre. We will make our tactical squad from Clan Sorgel and the veteran squad as Istvan survivors of Clan Averni. We will also use unit and squad markings off of the Legiones Astartes infantry transfer sheet. Starting with the order numbers, I use a brush to wet and soak the transfers. When they loosen, I use the same brush to lift them on the target surface and use my hobby knife to align them. For larger transfers, I dip the sheet in water to soak them, and I use Walther's Solvacet to wet the target surface before moving the transfer into place. Once the models have all of their transfers on, I let them all fully dry before adding a layer of Walther's Solvacet over the top to fix the transfers in place. It's time to kit our Marines out with the accessory sprue. I clip the top half of the sprue, leaving only one attachment point to the holsters, pouches, and grenades. I clean up the edges with my hobby knife. I prime the entire sprue with Citadel Chaos black spray paint. Next, using Citadel Caliban green, I paint the frag grenade bodies. Then, using Citadel Iron Breaker, I paint the frag grenade lugs, safeties, holster, and pouch buckles, and crack grenades. I switch to Citadel Warboss green and highlight the frag grenade bodies. Next, I use Citadel Eshin Gray and do a loose highlight over all of the holsters and pouches. I wash everything with Citadel Nuln Oil Shade. After everything has fully dried, I clip all of the parts off and with a hobby knife, clean up any excess sprue. I touch up the black holsters and pouches with Citadel Abaddon Black and the silver on the grenades with Citadel Ironbreaker. I then glue the holsters, grenades, and pouches onto the Marines. Adding accessories really adds visual interest and variety to your basic power armored Marines, and it's an easy opportunity to make your models better represent their war gear from the books. Moving on to the bolters and plasma guns, I start with Runelord Brass and paint the plasma gun coils and exposed rounds in the bolt gun magazines. I then switch to Ironbreaker and paint all of the silver details on the weapons, because I often paint half of each weapon. Let them dry and then paint the other half. This just makes them easier to handle. I then use Retributor armor and paint the small Aquillas and dry brush, highlight our plasma gun coils and exposed rounds in our magazines. Next, I use Eshin Gray and do a loose highlight over our weapon casings. During this step, you can also touch up any Ironbreaker brush slips. I switch back to Ironbreaker and do a highlight on our gold Aquillas. Then, I use Vallejo Air Metallic Black and paint all of the hands on the weapons. Finally, I glue all of the weapons onto the Marines, making sure that all the weapons properly match up to the correct Marines. I then use Nuln Oil and wash down all of the weapons and hands. It's time to move on to basing. Basing your Space Marines with a plain dirt style is a great choice that enhances the realism and provides a neutral backdrop to make the bright colors of your Marines pop. I'll show you how I base my Marines. Using PVA glue and an old paintbrush, I brush the glue onto the Marine's base. I then dip the base in a fine sand mix. Make sure the sand is fully covering the glue. You can use a finger and wipe off any sand hanging over the lip of the base. I let the bases dry and then paint over the sand with a generous coat of Citadel Dryad bark. I go pretty heavy on the Dryad bark. It will dry down onto the sand and further help fix it onto the base. Next, I dry brush Citadel Mournfang Brown over the sand. Then I do a final dry brush of Citadel Ushabti Bone. Using Reikland Flesh Shade, I do a generous wash. This helps blend the different shades of brown. I paint the rim of the base with Citadel Steel Legion Drab. Usually it takes 2 coats to get even coverage. I then apply weathering powders and dust to the base and the lower sections of the model's legs. This adds a more realistic look and helps blend the model into the base, creating the effect of minor dust kicked up over their armor as they traverse the battlefield. After applying the weathering powders, I use Tester's Dull Coat to fully seal the models. Our Iron Hands are complete, their cold fury and bitter vengeance ready to be unleashed upon the traitor legions. Thank you for watching, and please like, comment, and subscribe for more Age of Darkness videos.